But how much do I wish that I had this conversation? But unfortunately, I'm not gonna get that chance, at least here on Earth. The Chosen Season 3, Episode 2 is an amazing, amazing episode, and it has a lot of powerful moments, and in fact, it's the only episode of The Chosen to ever make me cry. And there's some good reasons for that, including my dad, which we'll talk about in this episode. But before we get to that, let me introduce you to Angel Studios, our channel sponsor for this episode. Of course, you can watch all of the old episodes of The Chosen and the new episodes that are coming out every single week on the Angel Studios app. But it's not just that. You can also watch other shows, including kids shows or comedy shows, or one that I'm super excited about, which is Testament. This show that just finished its first round of funding is going to be a modern take on the book of Acts, starting in Pentecost and then going from there. Think about all of the amazing stories that we could hear from that book. It's going to be really, really cool. And one of the reasons why I know it's going to be successful is because I've seen the movie that they've already put out, a full feature-length movie that has to do with this exact subject. Now, in the movie, they tell 5 parables of Jesus while interspersed between stories of Luke and Mary Magdalene and James, the brother of Jesus. It's very, very cool how everything is kind of mingled together. But of course, if you want to check out Testament or any of the Chosen episodes, you can always go to the Angel Studios app. So click the link in my description down below in order to check out the Angel Studios app and to check out more stories that amplify light, just like the Chosen. So in episode 1 of season 3, we saw as Matthew had this big blowout with his family. Now, we knew that this was coming because we had heard about it from season 1 and season 2. But this really shows us the enormity of what actually happened. Alphaeus completely blows up as he's basically being extorted by his son. This is a massive deal, so much so that Alphaeus actually declares a week of Shiva, basically a funeral for Matthew, saying that he no longer has a son. But of course, at the end of episode 1, we get this amazing moment with Matthew's father as he greets him as son. And yet we don't get any more context for that until episode 2. Now, right after the opening song of The Chosen, we get right to this scene where Matthew and his parents sit down for the first time to discuss something. The beginning of this conversation is super awkward.
I used to eat too much.
No, you didn't.
They're just kind of asking random questions. Shiva, Matthew's mom, is kind of trying to guide the conversation and make something happen here. But they have 2 choices as a family. They can either 1, pretend like nothing has happened and just kind of try to mend these relationships, or 2, they can dive straight into the healing and they can try to fix the damage that's been done. After a few moments of this awkward small talk, Matthew just can't handle it anymore. He begins to talk about the Sermon on the Mount and how he's convicted by what Jesus told him. Now, we see this recorded in Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus talks about anger in verses 21 through 26.
You have heard that it was said to those of old, "You shall not murder, and whomever murders will be liable to judgment." But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift.
Now, in episode 1, we hear as Christ says this, and then the screen focuses directly on Matthew. This is very intentional, right? This is something that Matthew is going through, and he sees this analogy as what's representative in his family. When he hears Jesus say brother, he knows that it means more than just that, and that this encompasses his relationship with his father as well. Matthew then goes into some pseudo excuses as to why he acted the way that he did. He says that he's different than everybody else, and then he says he just wanted to live a comfortable life. But then Alphaeus kind of sets him straight, and you can see Shiva is on the edge of her seat, hoping that this doesn't blow up into something big.
I never understood why I was so different from everyone else. I just wanted a comfortable life.
You wanted to be better than everybody.
Yes.
But then for the first time, instead of arguing with Alphaeus, instead of telling him that he's wrong, Matthew actually accepts what Alphaeus says, and for the first time, he acknowledges his wrong in front of his parents.
No, you're right.
Then Matthew goes on a spree of explaining exactly what he did wrong and how much sin he was actually carrying, not only acknowledging things like his love for money, but actually the damage that he caused to his parents. We can see how hard this is for Matthew, especially when he talks about his faith. He can almost barely get that word out of his mouth.
I turned my back on our people, and I believe the choices I made were better for me and more important than my family and faith.
But then again, we see as Matthew reverts pretty quickly back to the old way of thinking for him. He thinks of a way of atoning, a way of repayment to his parents. And this is how the old Matthew would have thought, right? As a tax collector, you think of things being owed and things being paid. And so this is the mindset that he goes back to. But then this is where everything changes. Because of Matthew's humility and the way that he approached his parents, this allows Alphaeus to treat him as a son again, to make sure that they have a full encompassing vision of what is actually going on here. Not just that Matthew was bad, but that actually Alphaeus may have something to atone for as well.
Sit down.
I prefer to stand.
Please.
I don't deserve the courtesy.
You're not the only one who must atone.
I really love the reactions that we see from Matthew and Elisheva here. Matthew is just flabbergasted. He is not even close to the point where he believes that Alphaeus has anything to apologize for. He's so focused on his own sin and his own struggles. And then Elisheva is so excited about what's about to happen. She can see that Alphaeus has been hurting for the last few years as he's been without a son, and he's felt bad about what he did. So she's just ready for him to be healed, for their family to be healed. Now Alphaeus begins by validating everything that Matthew said. He basically just explains to him, yeah, you did all this horrible stuff.
I lost my business because of you. And you are correct. We lost our reputations and friends.
But it's not to throw it in his face. It's not to hurt Matthew. It's to say, yes, you did do all of these horrible things. But even when you did all of those horrible things, I still had no right to do what I did. I still had no right to reject you as my son.
I had no right to reject you as my son. God should strike me down for the things I said to you. I was shameful.
And we can see that this confuses Matthew even more. He's stuck in this place of, yes, I did this horrible, horrible sin. I should be repaying you. You don't need to be repaying me. But this is really one of the first times, other than when Jesus called him, that Matthew is really experiencing grace. Because remember, even in his discussions with the disciples, many of them still have a hard time with him being a tax collector and what he did in his past. But his father is finally forgiving him and is willing to walk with him now through this whole process. This is where my heart broke in The Chosen. It wasn't Matthew talking about all the bad things that he did. It was Alphaeus coming and apologizing, telling Matthew that he's not the only one that did something wrong. This is Stephen Snipe. And while a lot of his friends and family called him Petey, I called him Dad, at least for a little while. Most of his adult life, he struggled with addiction. All different types of drugs, pretty much anything you could imagine, and heavily addicted to alcohol as well. This was a severe problem for him. And because of that, I never really got to know him. In 2002, he died because he ended up getting HIV, which turned into a tumor and a lot of different stuff, complications from there. And this is something that I've always struggled with. I've always wanted this moment that Matthew had. I've always wanted this moment of clarity with my father. But because of his choices, because of what he did, I'll never get that. My parents divorced when I was 3, and so from when I was 3 until I was in 3rd grade, I really never saw my dad. And when I was in 3rd grade, he passed away. He died because of his actions, because of his choices, because of what he decided to do here on earth. And I think I have a lot of resentment against him for that. I really wanted a relationship with my dad, and I know how different my life would have been if that were the case, and I know that God made my life beautiful out of the brokenness. But how much do I wish that I had this conversation? How much do I wish that I could just sit with my dad and have a talk with him? Tell him how much God has impacted my life. It's hard for me. And yet I know that God is my Father now. I know that God takes the place of all of these things in my life. And I don't have to worry about all of it. But still, a piece of me wishes that I had this moment. Still, a piece of me wishes that my dad would say that he's sorry for what he's done. But unfortunately, I'm not going to get that chance, at least here on Earth. The beautiful thing about both of these stories is that Alpheus, and I hope my dad, was changed by Christ. You see, I have a story from my family that says on his deathbed, while he was in the hospital just waiting to die from this sickness, my dad came to Christ. So for him, I cling to hope beyond hope that he's in heaven and that we can have that conversation one day. But for Matthew, there's even more earthly healing here. Alpheus not only is just being a good guy because he's a good guy, but he has been changed by Christ. He has experienced God. And like I say all the time on this channel, when you experience God, you cannot help but be changed. And so now Alpheus and Elisheva have seen Christ because they were at the Sermon on the Mount. And they were completely changed by this.
But what has changed? I sinned.
We saw him too, Matthew. We heard his sermon.
He's the teacher you're following.
Yes, he called me and I...
And you have already atoned. They were the most true words I have ever heard. Some of it shocking.
I know, I wrote it all down.
You are a scribe.
You will redeem our family's name.
Matthew, he chose you.
To this day, I don't know why.
This is what allowed Alpheus to see the error in his ways and to be able to forgive Matthew for everything that he's done and tell him, no, you don't owe us anything. You've already atoned. And then, of course, at the end of this conversation, we get the reinstatement of Elisheva and Alpheus as the parents of Matthew. Remember, throughout the other seasons and in this season in episode 1, we see as Matthew calls Alpheus by his first name, by Alpheus. But here, Elisheva is willing to reinstate themselves as parents of Matthew. Almost a resurrection of sorts, right? To bring Matthew back from the dead and to no longer say that they have no son. This is much more for Matthew than it is for the parents. They've already forgiven him and they're ready to move on, but for Matthew, it's giving him his rights as a son back, telling him it's okay. You can call us mom and dad again. Hey, editing Brandon here. I just wanted to let you know, I forgot to mention this part right here, which is one of my favorite parts of the entire scene. As Matthew is manipulating this handkerchief throughout the whole thing, we know that this is a sign of sort of stress and anxiety for him, but the second that he gets realigned with his parents, he actually puts it down. Kind of like the same thing that we see with him and Mary Magdalene in season 2. It's very similar to that, but I love this little touch they put all throughout this scene. But of course, just as it started, we have another awkward ending between the awkward family. But I love this little moment that they added here with Alpheus quoting exactly what Gaius said from season 1 of The Chosen when he handed over Matthew's possessions.
Sell it. Give it away, burn it down. I do not care.
I'm glad I didn't throw this away.
I will never live in that home again.
So what? Give it away. Tear it down. Burn it if you want.
This, on a personal level, is by far my favorite scene that The Chosen has ever done. And I'm really excited for the future of season 3, the relationship between Alpheus, Elisheva, and Matthew, and everything that's going to be coming in there, including, are we going to see Matthew's sister? This is another thing that I've been questioning over the last few months. But if you like this episode, leave a like and subscribe. And of course, if you want to support us, you can always go to our Patreon and help us over there. We love you very much, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace.